Okay, this side is rough. It's got a big old ridge of fairing right there. You can see lots of pits in here, all down through there. It is rough as a cob. I mean, it's not as bad as it was when it was nothing but a large rusting hulk of iron. Obviously, this ain't gonna cut it. What I'm gonna do is hit it with the belt sander real quick, knock down the big stuff, and then I'll put some fairing on here and work it till it's baby butt smooth. I've already done the other side, and ooh, it is smooth. It feels good. I'll get this worked down and I'll show you the finished product on it. Okay, I've hit all the high spots with the belt sander and then hit it again with a pad sander. So you can see all the contrast here. It really shows the contrast well now that I've sanded the high spots. You can see I've got a lot of filling to do all down through there. So this is going to take 2 fairing jobs here on this. One to fill in those big gaps, and then when I get that all done and sanded down, there'll be a bunch of little pinholes. And then I'll come back over it one final time to take care of any little pinholes. Okay, I think I'm ready to mix some fairing material after I wipe that down with some acetone. I've got the keel raised up with the tractor off the sawhorses. I didn't film any of it because honestly I didn't want to have to read all the comments about how sketchy it looked. It was seriously sketchy, but I've got it up and vertical. Now I'm going to bring it into the barn, put some vertical boards under the front end loader to support it. All right, more sketchiness, but it's a little more secure, I think. I've got steel clamps on here, chains, and 2 nylon straps. So between all of that, it should hold it in place while I do the finishing work on it. Looks like I still have a little bit of sanding to do here. I've got to touch the whole thing over with 80 grit. So there's just a couple of places where I've sanded past the fairing, just a hair, and exposed some of the metal. So what I'll do is whenever I rough this up with 80 grit, I'll come back over to these exposed areas and hit them with some more OSPO, that rust stopper, and then I'll have this thing prepped for painting. Today's the day for the paint job. Using Total Boat, Total Protect, 2-part epoxy. This is a primer and barrier coat. 3-to-1 mixture. Now, due to the kickoff times, I'm not going to be able to do several coats on my keel. So what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to break this down. So I've got me a little measuring cup here. So I'm going to use probably 1/4 of the product for each coat. You have to be real careful when measuring this, because the mix ratios are pretty sensitive when you start dividing this stuff down. But if you have something that measures it pretty accurately, you're going to be just fine. So anyways, 3-to-1 mixture. I'm going to mix this up. It has an induction time of 15 minutes, so I'll let it set for 15 minutes. And then we're going to start rolling it on the keel and see how things go. I've already wiped the keel down with acetone, and she's prepped and ready to go. So make sure you use clothes that you don't mind getting paint on, because this can get messy, I suppose, especially if you're prone to accidents. I'm going to mix up a small batch just to see what kind of coverage I get on this, and that'll give me an idea how much I need to go on the second coat. Wow, this stuff is really thick, and that's going to be as thin as varnish. So this stuff, whew, I think I already mixed it. While it was in the can, I gave it a little shake. I'm going to go ahead and mix it with the mixing stick. Yeah, it was really thick in the center. So I shook it around in the can, thinking that would probably be just fine, but this is some really thick stuff. Probably 1/2 inch around the edge. It seemed to be mixed up fairly decent, but the center wasn't clumpy, but it was really, really close. It was thick. So I'm gonna give this thing a good mixing. I'm gonna say it's probably a good idea to wear a respirator, because I can smell the fumes on this. It smells pretty strong. Look at that. It's not even running off of my mixing stick here. I've never had to spoon paint out before. Getting close. All right, right there. Okay, that's it right there.
Now I'm going to mix this up, and then there's an induction period of 15 minutes. So after 15 minutes, we'll put it in the roller dish and get to applying this. All right, it thins down a whole lot once you put the curing agent in it. As you can tell, it's really runny now, so that's good. I'm using some split switch cane for a mixing stick. Wiped it down with acetone, so I'm going to get around the edges and on the bottom really well. All right, I'll bring you guys back later because I'm sure you don't want to see me mixing paint. 15 minutes has elapsed. Now the moment of truth. 15 minutes gave me enough time to go feed the chickens and brew up some tea. Now, put this on here. Now I've learned from other epoxies, you don't want to scrape the sides because the sides may not be mixed up great. So anyways, I'm going to pour a little bit of acetone in this. That way it makes for a little easier cleanup. All right, we'll let that set and we'll get to painting. First coat is on there, and I learned right off the bat that the amount that I fixed up did exactly 1/2 of what I needed. So it only did one side of the keel and the edges. So whenever I do the second coat, I'll know exactly how much I need to mix in order to paint this thing all in one stab. So I've mixed up another batch, and the induction period of 15 minutes has come and gone. So now I'm going to get this on here. I would recommend using the respirator, and as you can tell, I'm now wearing gloves. The fumes are strong enough that it's a big old red flag that you definitely need to be wearing some protective gear for this stuff. Okay, this side has a coat of paint on it. I got a little better coverage on this side. It's a little thin there at the top, but down through the middle, I had a little extra paint. No doubt it's because the brush was already preloaded up with paint from the other side of the keel. So now what I have to do is I have to let this set up until I can push my thumb into it, and it'll leave a print, but it will not leave any epoxy on my finger. Once it hits that point, then I'm ready to put on a second coat. And I'll mix up a little extra paint also, just so I get a good coat on this thing. Then I'm just going to repeat those steps until I'm out of the primer barrier coat, and then I'll switch over to the other type of paint I'm going to use, which will be the final top coat. Okay, we're coming up on 2 hours now. So I put my thumb on the paint. Has just a little bit of tack to it, but nothing's coming off on my finger. So it's time to mix up the second batch, let it set for 15 minutes, and get another coat on here. All right, double the batch. Induction period is over. Now I'm going to get this poured into the pan, put on my second coat. It's all going pretty smoothly so far. All right, second coat is on. She's already looking much better. Let that set for 2 hours, and I'll mix up the last of the barrier paint and put it on there, and then I'll go to the epoxy paint. It's a different brand of stuff, and I'll talk about it in a little bit. Okay, so another 2 hours has elapsed, and now I'm getting towards the bottom of my paint. So I'm going to measure out the curing agent first, put it in a separate container just to make sure that my ratios don't get mixed up. All right, so that worked out very well. This is enough to do both sides. This will be my third coat. So anyways, another induction period of 15 minutes, and then we'll get this painted on. Looks like we got a good mix. Okay, this will be the last of the primer barrier coat, and about an hour and a half, 2 hours, I need to be looking at using my spray gun for the final coat. I'm going to be using some stuff called Class Coat, 2-part epoxy paint, and we'll see how it works out. Okay, this is where we're sitting at right now. So third coat is on there. It's starting to show a textured pattern to it, which I'm not really caring for. I don't know if the camera is going to pick it up or not. Probably not. That is almost certainly user error. So what I did was I went over the keel once and then still had leftover paint, and I went back over it again. You're really probably not supposed to do that with epoxy paint, or maybe even any paint for that matter. If this was a racing sailboat, I would probably let this cure out, then I'd hit it with a sandpaper just to smooth it down really smooth. But this sailboat is for camping. So long as that iron keel is protected, I'm happy. Now, in about an hour and a half to 2 hours, I am going to use this product here, Class Coat. So I've got bright red paint, got the catalyst, gloss catalyst right there, and then I've got a reducer because I'm going to try to put this on with a paint gun. I have only a little experience with a paint gun doing Cerakote on firearms, so this ought to be quite the little experience. So I'm going to go read all this material over, and in about an hour and a half I'll start mixing this up and we'll see how it goes. Slight problem, but I'm going to work it to my benefit. So this last coat, the third coat, cured faster than the other two coats. Now it is past thumbprint. There is no thumbprint. It's already kicked off too far to even leave a print. Everything I've read is you got to catch it at that thumbprint stage to put the top coat on here, and I'm past that. So what I'm going to have to do, and what I've decided I want to do, is go ahead and wait till tomorrow, and then I'm going to come back over this and hit it with 80 grit sandpaper, hit the whole thing, and maybe I can kind of smooth out a little bit of this this heavy orange peel look. Okay, I can already tell a pretty big difference. Okay, I've sanded the whole thing with 80 grit. Just hitting it with that 80 grit helped immensely. So anyways, I'm going to blow this off, wipe it down with acetone, make sure it's good and clean, and then I'm going to start mixing up the next batch. The next batch of the Class Coat requires an induction period of like 30 to 40 minutes with occasional stirring. We'll tackle that next. Alright, I'm fixing to mix up this Class Coat. From what I understand, you mix these two first, let the induction period go through for 30 to 40 minutes, and then you add your reducer. That's the way I understand it. So that's what I'm going to do. Alright, I've got my catalyst and my paint in here ready for mixing. And let me tell you what, red is definitely red. That's some seriously bright red. Okay, now I'm going to get this mixed up and start the clock. Alright, so as I've mentioned before, I have very little experience when it comes to these paint guns, except for Cerakoting some guns, but that's really about it. So this is going to be a learning experience, to say the least, but at least this is a good project to do the learning experience on an object that's going to be under the water that I will very seldom ever see, nor will anybody else. Alright, let's add that reducer. Okay, reducer has been added. It's very, very thin. Now I don't expect this amount to cover the entire keel. It's going to be another by guess and by golly. We're just going to see what it takes. Okay, please hold your oohs and ahs to the end of the act. I've already had to add a little bit of reducer to this, and I've also had to make an adjustment on my air pressure. Still need to make a little bit of adjustment. Alright, so I'm still playing with the adjustments on my paint gun, but you can tell it's coming out alright, it's getting there. We've rolled up on 2 hours, and I've made another mix. So I've got to let it sit for 30 minutes to 40 minutes. I also discovered that my paint gun had some corrosion and gunk inside the gun, so it wasn't giving me a real good pattern, a real good fan. So I give it a good thorough cleaning, and I'm hoping it sprays better this second go around. So if not, I may switch over to the paintbrush. Alright, so I'm not really liking how my paint gun's putting out the paint. It's just not putting out enough quantity. So I slowed way down in order to get a good wet coat on here. Never once had any trouble with runs or anything, but I really had to go slowly just to get a wet coat on there. And once I got a wet coat on there, man, that thing is shiny, shiny, shiny. Looks really good. Downside is that class coat is some tough stuff to clean up. I mean, it is some, for sure enough, epoxy paint. And it takes a little effort to get that stuff cleaned out of your gun. I think I'm going to go ahead on my third coat. I'm going to go ahead and apply with the paintbrush and just see what it looks like. So it's just curiosity is just killing me. I've got to try it with a paintbrush and see what it looks like. All right, I'm mixing up a bigger batch. I know it sounds crazy, but I'm going to put the last coat on with a brush. I know that sounds a little crazy, but especially after all the trouble of going through the using the paint gun and doing 2 coats with the paint gun, I'm really hating how hard it is to clean that stuff out of the paint gun. And I just wasn't getting a real good wet coat either. I had to leave that paint really spraying there for a long time to get a wet coat. So I'm going to try this, brush it on, and see what it looks like. This will also give me an idea of whether I want to do a brush on the hull of the sailboat or if I want to go ahead and do a spray. Now, of course, I didn't put any reducer on this because it would have made it way too runny. I'm hoping I put this on thick enough where it'll kind of smooth out, but not so thick that it runs. All right, so I'm going to quit talking and I'm going to concentrate on my painting here. So I'm really liking the way the class coat epoxy is applying on here with a brush. Pretty pleased with it. I had exactly the right amount. My last brush stroke did the very last part of the keel down there. I think I'm going to be pretty happy with that. So that's the basics on how to refurbish an old rusty iron keel. Now, this is the only one I've ever done, and I'm sure there's other ways of doing it, and the pros may be cringing at watching this video, but you really can't argue with the results. I mean, this looks pretty darn good compared to the way it looked when I pulled it out of the sailboat. Very, very happy with it. So I've got to let this cure. It needs to cure for a minimum of 4 days, up to a week. And then I'm going to have probably my father come down and we're going to re-cradle this thing. Once it gets cradled, then we're going to remount it back up underneath the sailboat. Hope you guys enjoyed that video.